I don't know how to arrange this, but hello, I'm Olivia, and my PubSpeak topic is narcissism. And thank you to Sarah for inspiring this use of Prezi. Okay. So first, I just want to address a couple of things. Narcissistic personality disorder is a thing that exists, but that is not what I'm addressing in this PubSpeak. There are a lot of debates as to whether or not it is a real psychological disorder or whether it is just a trait. I'm not going to differentiate between the two. I'll just be speaking about narcissism itself. And secondly, I'm sure most of you know the story of Narcissus. For anyone who does not, here's a brief overview. It was this young, very handsome guy named Narcissus who wasn't very into romance, and he had all these admirers who would pursue him, and he rejected all of them. And one day this young admirer came up and said, "Oh, I love you, la-di-da." And Narcissus said, "Okay, prove your love to me." And so he stabbed himself and said, "Okay, the gods will punish you." And the gods punished Narcissus by making him fall in love with his own reflection in a spring of water, so he was doomed to stare at himself forever until he died. And that is the story of Narcissus, which is where the term comes from. And this is a painting by John William Waterhouse, in case you wondered.
Yes.
Okay. So, narcissism is something of a slippery term. It's quite difficult to define. And different psychologists and linguists have different definitions of it. Andrew Elliott and Todd Thrash of the journal Psychological Inquiry say that it's an individual preoccupied with dreams of success and demonstrating superiority relative to others, whereas Dictionary.com says inordinate fascination with oneself, excessive self-love, whereas Wikipedia says the personality trait of egotism, vanity, conceit, or simple selfishness, and whereas a separate psychological journal says that narcissism combines a radical individualism with an insatiable need for approval and attention. So I'm of the opinion that if you combine all of these definitions, you can kind of come to a comprehensive way of explaining narcissism, but you can kind of pick and choose what you believe actually functions as an appropriate definition. But this isn't really what I'm talking about in this PubSpeak. So I would like to tell you about a study that was done in 2006. Here's someone doing a study, not this study, but a study. In 2006, this professor from San Diego State University sent a copy of this test called the Narcissistic Personality Inventory to 16,000 college students all across America. And the Narcissistic Personality Inventory is this 40-question test that consists of, well, they give you pairs of sentences, and you're supposed to select the sentence that you feel most applies to yourself. So some examples could be, I don't like people to pry into my life for any reason, versus I wish somebody would someday write my biography. And then we have, sometimes I tell good stories, versus everyone likes to hear my stories. So to us, it sort of becomes obvious which of these is the narcissistic statement, but the test is still somewhat valid. It has validity. And so for all intents and purposes, we're going to treat it as an accurate representation of who's narcissistic and who isn't. So when Twenge gave the survey to the college students, she had pretty impressive results because she found that 2/3 of all college students scored above average on the ranking of narcissistic personality, which means in essence that they got a score over 15. The test is rigged in such a way that for every narcissistic statement you agree with, you get a point. So the highest you could get is 40, but above average is 15. So that proved to be a 30% increase since 1982 when the survey was initially given. Also to 16,000 college students. So if you want to see that data in another way, that's a shift from 46% to 66%, which is actually quite a significant jump. So what I'm going to try to do is discuss why narcissism has grown so much in our culture in the last 30 years, and I like to call it the 3 pillars of narcissism. And we have special syndrome, which is posited by Twenge, the psychologist who did this test, internet validation, and social media, which is a pretty common way of describing why exactly narcissism is so prevalent. And thirdly, image cultivation, which is sort of my own theory, so I'm going to try to substantiate it with anecdotal evidence, and we'll see. But let's start with special syndrome. Okay, so this is kind of the classic reasoning for any increase in narcissism. The 1970s are deemed, especially by Twenge, as the beginning of the self-esteem culture. And in essence, this was when parents started placing a really special emphasis on the individual. as superior and as deserving. So she gives a lot of examples of this. She says, a lot of times we'll see in sports games the team that loses receives trophies for participating. Or sometimes a kid will pick up their plate and put it in the sink, and a parent will congratulate them for putting their plate in the sink. And thirdly, apparently there's a song, Julia says that she's heard it, I have actually not, but it's sung to the tune of Frere Jacques, and it's I am special, look at me. And so Twenge says that these occurrences that you'll experience as a child in the post-1970s era are what sort of start breeding narcissism within you. And she says that we, which she calls us Generation Me, have this inherent entitlement because it's ingrained in us that we as individuals, just because we exist, as opposed to because we do good actions or we have solid beliefs, are entitled to good treatment and entitled to sort of congratulations just for being around. And I personally, in my assessment of narcissism, definitely think this has an impact, but I don't think it's the only reason why so many of us are narcissists. So, okay. This we will get to later. This is not in the right order. Okay, internet validation. So this is one of the trickiest reasons that people cite as a reason for the prevalence of narcissism. And there was a study done at York University where 100 college students, which is a really small sample size, but even still, 100 college students who scored quite highly on the narcissistic personality inventory, they were given a room, and they had to design a Facebook profile for themselves. And it was discovered that these allegedly narcissistic young people actually showed extremely narcissistic tendencies on their Facebook profiles, as in posting hundreds of pictures of themselves in front of a mirror, or as in writing about what awards they'd won or what excellent things they'd done that day. Along similar lines, Twenge, who is the psychologist who studied the college students on the narcissistic test initially, found that 65% of students agree with the statement, my generation of young people is more self-promoting and narcissistic than previous generations, and she said that this is because of social media. But in reality, the people who contend that social media is making us narcissists are really mistaking the symptom for the cause. The internet gives us a means to develop our narcissism and perhaps to share it and spread it with more people, but we're not really narcissists because of social media. So, here's a person on Facebook. Our narcissism is not a product of the fact that Rate My Looks exists. Rate My Looks is a product of the fact that we are narcissists. And so while I do think there's reason to put some stock in social media as making us more narcissistic, I really don't believe that this is why there was a 30% increase since 1982 because we have Facebook profiles. Now, I think there's something that goes a little deeper. So, thirdly, we have the idea of image cultivation. And I'm going to go to the next slide. So, wait, I take it back. Hold on. There's one more thing to do with the internet. Okay. So, finally, there's something called narcisssurfing, which I don't know if anyone has heard of this. I used to think that my friend made it up, but then I Googled it and people use that word, so I don't think that she did. But narcisssurfing is basically when you Google yourself and you look for complimentary things about you on the internet. And I developed a flow chart. So basically, you Google your name, and then you would Google where you live, and then you would Google where you are from, and then you would Google something that you like to do. So narcisssurfing sort of allows us to see what other people think of us, which, in alignment with the argument that the internet is making us narcissistic, it kind of shows us that we're so intensely interested in ourselves that we would actually spend time researching internet posts about us. But anyway, let's get back to image cultivation. So, alright. When one is too interested in oneself and self-exploration, I believe that narcissism develops. And not to beat a dead horse, but a prime example of this is the hipster. Because if a person is in possession of a really shaky identity, and they're sort of unstable in their sense of self, they have a really strong tendency to try to forge a new identity that perhaps has no real relation to their actual self. And particularly in the case of the new hipster phenomenon of however many years, these new personas require a lot of research. So you have to find out, what kind of music you're supposed to listen to, or what clothes you should be wearing, or what manners of speech you should be using. And these take an awful lot of time, and the more time you spend focused on developing your personality, the more obsessed you're likely to become with that personality. And then if that personality succeeds and you're able to basically fake everyone out, there's a high probability that you may become a narcissist in that you're so obsessed with yourself and proving yourself to others that you develop a sense of superiority. And while this is not necessarily the root cause of narcissism, it's only one of many, it is one of the main reasons why I think it's so prevalent. And now I have to go back several slides. Forgive me. But along the same lines of image cultivation is this idea of inwardness. So there's a test that I know some people have heard of called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And Myers-Briggs is basically a personality test. I think it's around 100 questions. And you answer lots of sort of introspective questions about yourself and your personality. And they'll ask you things like, do you get anxious going to parties? Or how do you feel about, I don't know, are you quiet a lot? And you end up getting this result. And it has 4 letters. So you either get an I or an E for introverted or extroverted, an N or an S for intuition or sensing, a T or an F for thinking or feeling, and a P or a J for perceiving or judging. And basically this is supposed to compose an entire persona for you. And there are 16 different types. So when I was in the 8th grade, I became really, really obsessed with this, and I found out my type, and I would Google it, and I would read about it, and read random people on the internet talking about how cool their type is. And it's really exciting for impressionable people because it makes you feel like you're this really sort of special jewel. But Myers-Briggs is something, it's not a fraud, but it's something of a false test, because if you read every different type, you'll actually find that they have so many similarities that you can relate to each and every one in some way. So the reason we get so excited about our type is because we feel as though someone has some insight into us and they know the excellence that we actually possess, when in reality it's someone saying quite complimentary things, some of which might apply to you, but some of which might be completely arbitrary. And because it makes us feel good, we sort of, well, I did, and some other people do, hopefully, develop a really, really intense interest in it, and they research, and they try to divulge information about their type to other people. And so the inwardness that this cultivates in becoming so excited about exploring ourselves is actually a root cause in creating narcissism. Not necessarily this test, but the idea that we can explore ourselves and prove our immense individuality is something that is greatly increasing our own conceited natures. So now I'm going to move quickly through these slides again. But, okay. So most everyone is in possession of some measure of narcissism. A lot of people have Googled themselves. A lot of people have taken personality tests on Facebook, or they've taken the Myers-Briggs test. Narcissism really only becomes a problem when it impedes our relationships with others, or when it eliminates the freedom of others, as J.S. Mill would say. We can try to prevent ourselves from delving too deeply into this abyss of narcissism, as Professor Twangy says, by involving ourselves in things like service or participating in activities that we're not particularly good at. The reason we develop such grandiosity is because we think we are so excellent, and when we experience non-excellence, that sense goes down just a bit. So I would like to end this PubSpeak on a semi-bright note. This is a quote by, this is a poet / interesting person in Tony Hoagland, who wrote that there's socialism and communism and capitalism, and there's feminism and hedonism, and there's Catholicism and bipedalism and consumerism. But I think narcissism is the system that means the most to me. So I hope that this PubSpeak has made you realize that you're a little bit narcissistic, but that it's okay, and you should all go home and Google yourselves.